already said, my name is Derek Levine. I set up today's event. Our first speaker today is going to be Luke Hansen. Luke is originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and moved to Minnesota in 2004 to pursue a degree in urban studies from the University of Minnesota. Following graduation, he spent 3 years working in marketing, packaging music for use in television and movies. After leaving the world of marketing, Luke was employed in a variety of capacities, including stints in social work, transportation advocacy, continuing the eternal struggle of a performing musician. In 2013, Luke joined the City of St. Paul Department of Public Works as an intern. And in 2014, was hired into the Capital and Transportation Planning Division. Since joining the city, Luke has worked primarily on bicycling initiatives, including helping develop the St. Paul Bicycle Plan, coordinating the implementation of new bicycle facilities, and developing a bicycle and pedestrian count program for the city. Please help me welcome Luke Hansen.
Thank you, Derek. So because it's so early, I'm going to share this moment of candor with you and say, this is earlier than I've ever given a presentation. And somewhere written into my contract is that I rarely have to do a presentation so early. So I expect this to be an experiential PowerPoint for both of us. But as Derek mentioned, my name is Luke Hansen. I work for the City of St. Paul. And I'll provide a brief overview on the St. Paul Bicycle Plan and the development of that plan. So I'll start with this timeline because in terms of presentations, I always find the timeline is my least favorite part. So I'll lead with this. And the bike plan is the product of a 4-year planning effort. And while there's a lot in this within those 4 years, I'm going to kind of summarize them into these 3 phases. And the first phase began in 2011, and this was largely an information gathering phase where we went out and had public meetings and asked these very broad general questions about what would you like to see in a bicycle network, what do you identify as barriers to biking, and it was really an opportunity for us to gather information to help form our plan. The second phase, which largely happened in 2013, 2014, included the development of a draft plan. And this was largely the development of a corridor planning document identifying bicycle facilities in St. Paul. And the development of this was directly influenced by that feedback that we got in phase 1. Also in phase 2, we worked on this draft plan and we released it publicly. And following the release of that plan in early 2014, we performed significant community outreach to get some feedback so we could revise this plan and help create a final planning document. And then finally the third phase, which is later in 2014 and 2015, included 2 major revisions to the plan. That was based on the feedback we received in the second phase. And we worked to finalize the planning document. And then finally, in March of 2015, the St. Paul Bicycle Plan was adopted by the St. Paul City Council. So now I'll take a step back and provide some background planning context for the development of the bike plan. And one of our first points is that, hey, look, Minneapolis made one. And in the spirit of sibling rivalry, if they do it, why can't we? And why can't we do it better? And it remains to be seen whose planning document is better, but that was certainly influential in developing that. But less facetiously, when we were developing this, before the bike plan, we asked this question: are bicycle facilities appropriate for a street? And anytime we would have a street maintenance project or a street reconstruction project, we would have to ask this question. And not only is this a particularly inefficient way to implement bicycle facilities, but if you continue in this manner, it leads to what would be likely a disconnected, fairly incongruent network of bicycle facilities. So there's this very real, very practical need to develop a bike plan. Additionally, the 2008 St. Paul Comprehensive Plan laid out some very specific guidelines that helped guide the formulation of that plan. And more specifically, it encouraged us to pursue active transportation and expanding transportation options beyond that, which is the motor vehicle. It guides us to develop and maintain a complete connected bikeway system, increase the bicycle mode share, And then it gives us this more specific direction in terms of bicycle spacing. So it advises us that bike lanes or trail facilities should be spaced at 1 mile intervals, and bikeways should be spaced at half mile intervals. And then there's this other question of who bikes, who is a bicyclist. And there's this really interesting bicyclist typology that was developed by Roger Geller in Portland. And this is both a component of our bike plan, but also helps influence its development. And the takeaway here is that, 30% of the population is not interested in bicycling. They may not be physically able to do so, they just might not be interested. On the other end of the spectrum, 1 to 2% falls into this strong and fearless category. So regardless of what we would do, regardless of any implementation or investment in infrastructure, they'd likely ride anyways. Then we have this 5 to 10%, which we call enthused and confident. There's different names for them, but that's what this technology is using. And this is what we largely consider who are using our facilities today. In terms of our built network, they're comfortable using bike lanes, perhaps they're comfortable riding in traffic. But the biggest takeaway here is the majority of people fall into this interested but concerned category. And if we want to fulfill the directives of our comp plan and increase our mode share and increase bicycling in St. Paul, we have to appeal to this interested but concerned group of that spectrum. So there are a couple of primary recommendations to come out of the bike plan. And first and foremost is a planned bicycle network. Now, from the city's perspective, one of the simplest and most effective ways we can increase bicycling is by increasing the bicycling network, by expanding it. And that is the primary function of this bike plan. There are also 2 additional primary recommendations that come out of this. And they're primary in terms of their scope and their impact to the city. And those are completing the Grand Round in St. Paul and development of an off-street trail network through downtown. And I'll speak to each of these items in greater detail. So this is a table displaying our planned bicycle network expansion. And there's a lot of numbers on this table, but there's a few that are important. One of which is our existing facilities, and it's showing that we have approximately 150 miles of existing bicycle facilities in St. Paul. What this plan is proposing is to more than double that. So we're proposing almost 200 additional miles of facilities for a total of 350 miles of bike facilities in St. Paul. So this is a major expansion of the bicycle network. And this can be visually represented in these figures from the bike plan. So this is figure 2, which is displaying the existing bicycle network. And this might be a little bit difficult to see, but the key takeaway is that while there's a lot of great independent facilities, the network lacks connectivity. And there's some major gaps in the system, notably when looking at downtown. Now transitioning, this is figure 4, and this is the planned bicycle network. And this is a visual representation of the primary recommendation of this plan. And while it might be difficult to discern these individual roadways or corridors, I hope you can see that this represents a significantly more dense, more connected, safer network of bicycle facilities throughout the city. I'll quickly go over this because most of you are familiar with these facility types. But the bike plan makes a recommendation in terms of 4 facility type groups, one of which is off-street paths, which is a traditional trail facility. In-street separated lanes, which for the purposes of our planning encompasses both bike lanes, buffered facilities, and even things like protected bike lanes or cycle tracks. Bicycle boulevards, and then enhanced shared lanes. And enhanced shared lanes is kind of a catch-all, which could mean a variety of implementations, perhaps a share-out, perhaps some signage, but likely something that isn't quite a bicycle boulevard. Now, in terms of the second major recommendation of the plan, we have the St. Paul Grand Round. And the Grand Round is particularly interesting. So it was actually designed in the 1880s by H.W. Cleveland. And very similar, so those of you who are familiar with Minneapolis Grand Round, you know it's a phenomenal asset. It's this wonderful recreational amenity, but it serves this really practical transportation purpose too. And what's really exciting is that we could have something identical, or at least likely similar, in St. Paul. But the reality of our current Grand Round is that the southern section is already in place. And those of you familiar with Mississippi River Boulevard and the San Morgan Regional Trail can recognize that as the southern half of the Grand Round. And for a lot of it, it's a really enjoyable facility and serves a really important transportation focus. However, the northern half of the Grand Round is incomplete. So if you want to tour the city and tour the Grand Round as you would in Minneapolis, by the time you get to Wheelock Parkway and Johnson Parkway, you will find an absence of bicycle facilities, and that's much more difficult. And what the bike plan is recommending is to complete this northern half of the Grand Round. And again, I want to emphasize that while this is often positioned as a recreational amenity, we see this as a really important transportation resource as well. So currently planning is underway for the design and completion of the northern half of the Grand Round. Construction is planned for segments of the Grand Round on Johnson, Wheelock Parkway, and Pelham Boulevard in 2016, which is particularly exciting. And that's funded through the city's 8 to 80 Vitality Fund, which is a one-time funding source that was established to support livability and walkability and bikeability in St. Paul. Now into downtown. Throughout the development of the bike plan, we received a lot of feedback. But one of the largest pieces, one of the most consistent and constant pieces of feedback was that people wanted to see bicycle improvements downtown. And for those of you who are familiar with trying to bike downtown, that's not necessarily surprising. Downtown itself is cut off. There's a lot of barriers that make it difficult to access the beach. In this image, you can see that the freeway cuts downtown St. Paul off from many of its neighborhoods. And this is a difficult barrier to cross by bicycle. Additionally, downtown St. Paul is at a lower elevation than most of the rest of the neighborhoods in the city. And when thinking in terms of non-motorized transportation, this is an issue. And finding ways to navigate that grade difference is really important. Now, when imagining what a bicycle facility could look like downtown, we're particularly inspired by the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. And this is a fairly unique implementation nationally. And what we find is that they have an off-street urban trail network through downtown. And rather than just being a kind of typical bituminous trail, it's highly stylized. They use brick pavers. It has an identifiable branding scheme. And what's exciting is that it's not just a recreation or transportation resource, but Indianapolis has leveraged this as an economic development tool as well. And that's something that we are particularly excited to do in St. Paul. So during the development of the draft plan, we initially identified a few corridors to implement this downtown off-street trail network. And as we performed the outreach and had more discussions, we realized that this was a much larger discussion. And in order to facilitate the completion of the bike plan, we thought that we could perform some additional analysis in addition to the bike plan. So while we had initially identified some corridors to implement, we're now kind of looking at other potential options to do that. However, the bike plan does recommend that Jackson Street be the first leg of this off-street trail network, and that has been funded and will be implemented in 2016. Looking for wood to knock on. And then Jackson Street, just for the sake of visioning here, we created a rendering. So this is Jackson Street as it is currently. And then this is an early rendering that we came up with, identifying an off-street trail facility. And When considering how you navigate downtown St. Paul by bike currently, this could be a transformative project. And again, kind of going back to that typology of bicyclists, you're capturing those people who aren't necessarily comfortable biking in the street. And this is a more recent rendering of what facilities could look like on Jackson Street. Similar to the Grand Rapids study, the downtown planning study is currently underway. The first leg of the network will be constructed in Jackson Street in 2016, and it will also be at least partially funded through the 80/80 Vitality Fund. Now, as the bike plan process developed, it went from being kind of just a corridor planning document to something more robust. And what we heard through feedback was people wanted us to incorporate elements beyond that of just engineering. So the scope of the bicycle plan changed a little bit. And the name actually changed. We went from the bikeways plan to the bicycle plan to denote this change in scope, and that we're talking about some broader initiatives. And the bicycle plan touches on things like end-of-trip facilities, encouraging bicycle parking and showers and lockers, potential adjustments to zoning code, and reevaluating minimum requirements for bike parking and redevelopment. Additional items in this expanding scope are a more robust bicycle and pedestrian counting program and doing things like encouraging Nice Right to expand their footprint in the city of St. Paul, as well as some other initiatives. And then finally, the last chapter of the bike plan talks about implementation and prioritization. And as I touched on, the two larger capital priorities are downtown and the Grand Round. But we also developed these principles for prioritizing other bikeways. And these principles are connectivity and safety, usage, equity, and cost effectiveness. And we stopped short of ranking individual projects. And this, to a certain degree, can be attributed to a lack of a dedicated funding source. But that said, we still want to make sure that we're using these principles as we look at to what projects to prioritize. This chapter also recommends incorporating bikeways into existing maintenance projects. And without a dedicated fund to implement the recommendations of the bike plan, this is one of the most cost-effective ways to implement bicycle infrastructure currently. This chapter also kind of loosely touches on general implementation and maintenance costs. And then finally, I want to circle back to this question that I posed at the beginning of this presentation, and that is, are bicycle facilities appropriate for the street? And what's been particularly nice is that since the adoption of this bike plan in March, we've had the answer to that question. And as a result, we've been able to install more bike facilities in 2015 than I think we have in recent memory. And I won't go through the list, but this is just representative of what we've been able to accomplish with the guiding planning document. And with that, I'll take questions. Thank you.
For time's sake, we'll hold questions till the end, and then we'll bring both of them back up. That works for everybody. Our next speaker is Kelly Hennepin. Kelly is the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for Hennepin County. She works within the Department of Planning to coordinate bicycle and pedestrian projects, policies, and programs across all units of public works, across departments within Hennepin County and our external partners. In 2013, she moved back to the Twin Cities where she grew up after working for the New York City DOT as a pedestrian planner and for A. Nelson Associates as an urban designer. She received her Master's of City and Regional Planning from Rutgers University and her undergraduate degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please help me in welcoming Kelly Hennepin.
Hello, good morning. So I'll be talking about the recently passed 2040 Bicycle Transportation Plan for Hennepin County. And as you can guess from the title, it's a transportation-focused plan. So we did not look at necessarily recreational cycling, although a lot of times, as Luke mentioned, those facilities are the same. So start kind of with the general vision of what we were trying to accomplish with the bicycle plan. And that was really that riding a bicycle, transportation, recreation, and health is comfortable, fun, and routine part of daily life throughout the county for people of all ages and abilities. And we really want to focus on that all ages and abilities and making sure we were reaching as many people as we could. There's three kind of main sections of the bike plan. One was defining the bicycle system, what are the planned corridors, and identifying gaps. So where do we have two bicycle facilities that have a half mile in between that critical connection that's missing? What are the programs we can do to support bicycling, whether that's safety programs, encouragement programs, enforcement programs, and then finally, how do we implement this all? What's our prioritization? What are our performance targets? How are we incorporating bicycling into the daily business of the county? So who's this plan for? It's very similar to what Luke was talking about. We're again looking at those four quadrants of strong and fearless, enthusiastic, confident, interested but concerned, and not able, not interested. And while we do see the biggest growth coming from that interested but concerned group, that kind of 53-60% group of people, I think it was key for us that it's for everyone. That we didn't want to forget our strong and fearless and enthusiastic and confident riders out there who are going to love, county shoulders out in being able to go fast and really ride in kind of the group rides out in those areas, but also creating the trail systems and the protected bikeways to get the interested but concerned, and then clarifying the roadway for those people who are not interested or not able. How do we create a clear system that communicates clearly to drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists how to use a system? So really looking at all ways of how we can define the system for them. So we started out with some public feedback sessions. We did 3 sessions of public feedback throughout the plan. One was before I started with the county in 2013. We went out to farmers markets, we went out to special groups like youth groups, different community groups, and went to their meetings and held sessions trying to get feedback on what they were looking for in bicycling infrastructure throughout the county. And these are some of the things we heard from all of those groups. We also went to things like farmers markets and then just had standard open houses. So a high appreciation for what's already out there, a desire for that comfort and protection from vehicles, and increased connections to the neighborhoods and regional trails. So how do we get people to these fabulous facilities that already exist? And that closing those gaps, some interest in winter maintenance. It's a really growing part of bicycling in the Twin Cities, so how do we start looking at that at the county level? And then enforcement and education of traffic laws, and that was for all users. And this fed into 5 main goals of the plan. Ridership, really improving ridership, promoting bicycling as a mode of transportation. Bikeway system and maintenance, so really, or bikeway system and facilities, building out all of those different bikeways and also looking at those end-of-trip facilities. Safety and comfort, again, increasing that protection, increasing that range of choice within facility type out there. Sustainability, both environmental, social, and economic, so how are we both impacting our natural environment, but also how are we making it easier for people who maybe can't afford a car or don't want to have a car, or have access to public transportation. How do we help their economic and social sustainability? And then maintenance, again, looking at not only winter maintenance, but kind of the general year-round maintenance. How are we keeping up the quality of our trails and bikeways? So here's the bikeway system. It's a very little map in a very big county. Currently, we had 651 miles on the ground that we defined as part of the county system. Now, what is the county system? Some of it's along county roads. All of Three Rivers regional trails are part of the system. A lot of actually local streets are also part of the county system. If we've had a county road that we can't fit a bikeway on, but 1 block over there's a bicycle boulevard, we will identify that as part of our county system, and then uniquely we will also fund or help fund that bikeway on a local street. So even if it's not on the county road, we'll participate in that. What our plan system does is almost double the mileage out there with an additional 536 miles just on the county system. So within this, there's a finer grain of local systems that aren't serving maybe that regional purpose that we're looking for. We're looking for things that are connecting major destinations, really going through communities, connecting multiple cities. If it's a path around a lake, if it's just a local bike boulevard that's not connecting major destinations, that's part of the local system and it would be part of our system. So that we're really looking at a large increase, as well as when we heard an increase in off-street planned bike facilities. While we still have a lot of on-street, that ratio has really gone up from what our previous plan was. And we've had a plan since 1997. So this was an update and kind of reimagining of that 1997 plan. And we also looked at all of the bikeway gaps. So we've had a bikeway gap plan in place for about a decade, or just over a decade now. And we really refreshed that, redefined what we were looking at as far as a bikeway gap. We said it had to connect to existing facilities and be under half a mile. If it started to get over half a mile, that's just a whole new corridor that we need to start planning. So this goes around and identifies all those gaps. We do have dedicated gap funding every year to participate with cities to work on closing these gaps. And then within each of these, we identified our top 25 gaps and our top 25 corridors that were county priorities. And those we kind of put out there as everything we do is a partnership with our cities. So how do we kind of communicate to them, this is where we want to work, and hopefully they'll come and join us. And right now we're working on 2 of them down in around MSP Airport and Portland, between Richfield and Minneapolis, and creating a connection there. So some of the programmatic actions that we're looking at, one is bicycle counting. We've been rolling out a fairly robust bicycle counting program this year for the first time at the county level. We're using tube counting rather than volunteers. And we've counted 60 locations on the south end of the county, and we'll be doing another 60 on the north end of the county next summer to really start building towards hopefully getting bicycle miles traveled throughout our system. We're also working to get working with MnDOT to get some permanent counters that we can get year-round counts throughout the county for bicycle counting that'll help with some of the adjustment factors on the bicycle counting. Bicycle parking guidelines. While the county doesn't have land use authority, we do have these as a guide to a lot of our funding sources when we're doing housing or TOD development, as well as every time we're building a county facility, what are we providing for end-of-trip facilities and bike parking. We've just applied for bike-friendly county status or community status, and we're going for bike-friendly business as well, working with our health and enforcement arms to develop safety evaluation, education, and enforcement campaigns, and then wayfinding and trip planning. I brought copies of our new bicycle map from this year, which has been very popular, and we're almost out, so those are probably some of the last we have for the year. We've got to print some this year. And also, I think wayfinding is something that's kind of an ongoing conversation of how do you guide people to a lot of the amazing trails we have. So some of our performance targets, within the county, we want to quadruple the number of bicycle commuters, halve bicycle crashes per capita, and move towards 0 deaths. Bring the ratio of bicycle commuters who are women to half, and that's really, women are seen as kind of more safety conscious, and therefore it's an indicator of how safe is our system. Have we really created that safe and comfortable place if we're looking at bicycle commuters who are women? Complete an average of 20 miles a year on the system, and that is a split number between us and Three Rivers. This plan was a partnership there. And then have a bikeway within half a mile of 90% of homes in Hennepin County. And so rather than having rigid spacing guidelines, because the county is so diverse from Minneapolis all the way out to Independence, strict spacing guidelines didn't make sense. You get out to some of the farther reaches of the county, our roads are, are pretty far apart. Were we going to cut through bikeways everywhere? So we decided this kind of metric of where are people living and making sure we have bike lanes where we have density. So how are we implementing it? Some of it's through efficiencies of integrating it with all of everything we're doing. So if we get a plat in to review, we're getting dedicated right-of-way with the plats that we have, and we're using this document as our guidance. We can just look at it and say that road is going to have a future bikeway, and we'll get the easement then rather than having to go back and acquire right of way later. And then every capital project, we examine all of our mill and overlays are all looked at in the lens of this plan to grab them when we're doing a project already. Again, the prioritization, this helps with, we have 2 dedicated funding sources for bikeways, one just for building out corridors in partnership with cities and one for closing gaps. So this helps in guiding the funding choices for those. And then we've also created design guidelines to hopefully create consistency within at least even our language of what we're talking about within the county as far as different bicycle facility types and what those minimums are for design. And then we've also gone through and identified every single unit, what they're responsible for within implementation. So given any topic, we know who we're going to, and that really clarified a lot of confusion that maybe was happening between departments of who was in charge of what. So that's my brief presentation, but thank you, and to answer questions. I also have brochures and maps over here if you want more information on bicycle.
I think I'll have Luke come up. Are there any questions for